On the podcast today, we are going to speak about chapter 64 of the Tao Te Ching, which makes up the 64th episode of the 81 meditations on the Tao Te Ching. And as usual, Guyang will read Jia Fu Feng and Jane English's translation, and I will read Derek Lin's translation.
Peace is easily maintained. Trouble is easily overcome before it starts. The brittle is easily shattered. The small is easily scattered. Deal with things before they happen. Put things in order before there is confusion. A tree as great as a man's embrace springs from a small shoot. A terrace 9 stories high begins with a pile of earth. A journey of 1,000 miles starts under one's feet. Those who act defeat their own purpose. Those who grasp lose. The wise do not act and so are not defeated. They do not grasp and therefore do not lose. People usually fail when they are on the verge of success. So give as much care to the end as to the beginning. Then there will be no failure. Therefore, the wise seek freedom from desire. They do not collect precious things. They learn not to hold on to ideas. They bring people back to what they have lost. They help the 10,000 things find their own nature, yet they refrain from action.
When it is peaceful, it is easy to maintain. When it shows no signs, it is easy to plan. When it is fragile, it is easy to break. When it is small, it is easy to scatter. Act on it when it has not yet begun. Treat it when it is not yet chaotic. A tree thick enough to embrace grows from the tiny sapling. A tower of 9 levels starts from the dirt heap. A journey of 1,000 miles begins beneath the feet. The one who meddles will fail. The one who grasps will lose. Therefore, sages do not meddle and thus do not fail. Do not grasp and thus do not lose. People in handling affairs often come close to completion and fail. If they are as careful in the end as the beginning, then they would have no failure. Therefore, sages desire not to desire, and do not value goods that are hard to acquire. They learn to unlearn and redeem the fault of the people, to assist the nature of all things without daring to meddle. So just like in chapter 63, we are analysing the art of wu-wei, effortless action, non-interference, intelligent spontaneity, if you will, in chapter 64. So this one backs on to chapter 63, and you see how ordinary people deal with the world and how a sage deals with the world. And so how a sage becomes a complete sovereign individual by going through a process of unlearning.
Yes, Lao Tzu in this chapter explains very little things in detail for us, right? And from the very beginning, basically his message is to take care of things before big things happen, right? So take care of the small things, and if there is any signs of going wrong, then you take care of it when it's small right away. Then you prevent bigger things, accident or whatever happens. Just like getting a regular health check for all of us, right? Before you get very unfortunate news, you just take care of yourself regularly in advance.
That's right. Well, that's what one of the key indicators for longevity is constant screening, right? So a lot of people think it's a lot of other things, but it is constant screening if you pick up something early. And so that's on a very generic and practical level. And so Lao Tzu is kind of dissecting this in many different ways, how great things come from small things, with the tree analogy in this chapter coming from a sapling. And so within that seed, there's so much potential. And so us as human beings, there's so much potential within that seed of our existence, but a lot of us squander that potential. And that's a little bit of what Lao Tzu is saying in this chapter. We squander it because we are attached to outcomes, we are attached to ourselves, we are attached to the perception of how people think about us and so forth and so on. Where the sage is going through that process of unlearning to become a complete sovereign individual. They are not dictated to by whatever the ideals of the society are, and live by their own personal ideals, which are aligned with the way of nature, the way of the Tao. And that is the job for all spiritual aspirants on the path, to not be shaped in society's image or in a culture's image, but to get rid of those ideas, to get rid of those so-called moral ideals, which they themselves are often immoral, and so that you come back into the heart of your existence, which is the Tao.
Yes. Yes, in this chapter mentions about the one who act will defeat their own purpose. So act here meaning as in like forceful action, opposite from effortless action, right? And those who grasp will lose. Grasp here meaning as in you're having a strong grip onto something, so you have a strong attachment on something, so that you will actually spoil it in the end. And unfortunately, this day and age, a lot of people go around that manner instead of being the wise man's approach, right? But like a very last line, and yet they refrain from this forceful action, so they do not act, and they only operate from the Taoistic approach, so that, and yet they let it takes its own course on its own.
That's right. And Lao Tzu is warning us about not meddling in other people's affairs, right? To speak to that, and that's a big part of Wu Wei, this non-interference aspect, which we've spoke about many, many times throughout the series, but we have to speak about it again because it's very important, and it is a spiritual principle that many people need to focus on, because often when you're focused on everyone else's business, you fail at your own, right? And so people are worried about this and that, about how other people should think as they think, and so forth and so on. But they themselves are a failure in their own lives. And so it's ironic, right, that you fail in your own life, but you're out there trying to tell other people how to think and how to be based on actually someone else's idea. That didn't come from you innately. And that's what Lao Tzu is warning us about. Lao Tzu is saying, why don't you strip it all back? Would you actually really think like that? If we stripped it all back, we took all of these ideas and concepts that you've gathered as you've lived, and this conditioning that you've gathered, how would you think and how would you behave if I stripped that all away? You would just be pure presence. And so you would be completely present in the experience of your own life. And you wouldn't be swayed by this narrative or this idea or this ideology, because you would be at one with nature, at one with the Tao, because everything is gone. And that's actually where the Tao comes into your life. It doesn't come into your life if you're attached to all of these things. The Tao gravitates to that which is empty. And so if your mind is full of all these ideologies and narratives and your own subjective agenda for the world, then Tao won't make use of you. And that's ironically why those people who are so agenda full often laugh at Taoism and other religions, because it doesn't come into their life, because they've got a full cup. They don't have an empty cup, right? And so that's where fasting the mind comes in as a practice. You've got to completely fast your mind. But these people will continue to think that all of these spiritual people are just idiots and fools, and it's because they've never been touched by the Tao, because they themselves are telling other people how to think and how to be. That's not actually how nature is.
No.
That's not how the Tao is. And so if you want to know the Tao, you've got to strip it all back.
Yeah, the people who like to tell other people what to do and how to think and what's right and what's wrong and things like that are majority of people, the weak people. That position is coming from the weakness within them, those people. Weakness meaning here's many ways. Weakness in they're unable to think for themselves, and they have no bigger perspective of the world and how things work, and also perspective of how other people's lives are like, right? And from that weak position, they easily get persuaded by what other people tell you to follow and think and believe and whatnot, because they don't have any strong conviction or trust, or they have they don't have any ability to think for themselves, so that they easily get adapt to the status quo, for instance. So then they really borrowed thinking, but they think that's of their own, right? And there's a big sign of weakness. They just repeat what the current affairs tells you, what's important and how you should be, and what's this new morality and this and that, and you just lean on that kind of idea, and you think that is the way, and you take on board and you make it as yours. And that is completely absence of critical thinking, right? So that itself is the weak mindset. And from that place, only from that place, ironically, you can tell other people what to do, right? The person of Taoist way is, like you said, empty. Within themselves is empty, not in a bad way, empty as in they're completely open, and their mind is completely calm and peaceful and tranquil, so that they're able to import any new ideas. But because they are strong people, they have ability to think for themselves, and they can say no to things that are contradicting to your own conviction and trust and your own knowledge and philosophy and whatnot, right? That is a character of a strong people. So if you're in a strong position, you are able to see yourself critically, so that you know that it's not appropriate to tell other people what to do and how to think, right?
No, of course not.
And because you follow from a deeper place, so that you inquire deeper knowledge, and you actually get to see reality from a much deeper place. So from that place, only empowers yourself, right? And because again, like the mind of someone who constantly needs to tell other people what to do is what they're insecure inside, right? But the strong people don't need to tell other people what to do, because they have a deeper inquiry within themselves. So they know it's not a place where they can tell other people what to do and how to live life. So it's so that we need to move away from the weak mindset and move into the strong mindset, as in have a courage. And it can sometimes be difficult and take quite a bit of time, because you need to be really courageous and brave, and you need to also, first and foremost, gotta be very honest to yourself as well. Like, being honest to yourself is one of the most difficult thing, right? That you thought that you know all this, but actually you don't. But if you're not honest with yourself, you don't give yourself any chance and opportunity to grow from the place that you know that you don't know, right?
That's right. Yeah.
Yes, again, like here also Lao speaks about learning the unlearning. They're trying to unlearn what's been learned.
That's right.
So you're stripping away your own conditioning and preconceived idea from whatever education or past experience or society tells you how things are and things like that. But again, you need to constantly unlearn also to move forward for yourself.
That's right. The Taoist sage is a sovereign individual because they've gone through that process of unlearning. So they've refined their own ideas and they pursue their own ideals, right, as a result, because they emulate nature. They don't emulate a society. And so to speak to what you were saying, like there's this big thing in the modern day particularly about political correctness, right? And so because the Taoist emulates nature, they are not in sync with what is politically correct because they follow what is natural. They don't follow what is man-made and what society tells you to do, which is, again, man-made. It's coming from someone else's mind seeking to control you. And so one of the core stories in the process of Lao Tzu's life is that he left the society because the Confucian society was trying to muzzle him with political correctness. And he said, but I know the Tao, like that's not actually how the Tao is. You're trying to make it some sort of contrived element of society that if we sleep a certain way, if we do this and that, we bind women's feet, we dress a certain way, then the Tao comes into our life, and Lao Tzu's laughing and, gets on his ox and hightails it out of there. And so that's a good example for all of us, because is society trying to muzzle you with political correctness, and are you falling for it? Imagine if Lao Tzu had lived through the pandemic. He would have been laughing all the time at how the governments and the medical industry were trying to muzzle people and tell them what to do and so forth and so on. And Lao Tzu would have just laughed, got on his ox again, and hightailed it out of there. And he wouldn't have had a mask on, obviously. So the politically correct mentality that a society or a culture is trying to superimpose on people is already innately flawed. And so it's up to us as individuals to notice that. And that's what this chapter is saying, because if you go through that process of unlearning that Lao Tzu went through and that he is trying to influence us to follow, then we wouldn't be easily swayed by whatever BS is being spread on TV or on social media. For example, if you didn't have a TV or social media, what would you believe in half the things that you would hear, like secondhand knowledge?
Yeah, it wouldn't even be part of your conceptual knowledge at all.
No,
it's not part. That is not part of your world.
No.
Yeah. Because
one of the worst social media networks, applications, if you will, in the modern day is YouTube, right? It can be great. We can connect with a great audience on here, and we love and appreciate my esteemed audience, right? And our esteemed audience on the podcast. But it's a catch-22, because once people start scrolling that feed, that home feed, there's one video after the other, and the algorithm is completely against you. That's what you need to realize. You can't just type something into the algorithm that I just want to see spiritual content. Doesn't work like that. Never works like that. Because if you and I say one word in this podcast, the algorithm will assume maybe that one word's related to this video. And the next one, you get a barrage of political content on your home feed, and then it trains you to think a certain way. I feel sorry for a lot of the youth in this day and age, where they're running around smashing up cities and this and that because one of their so-called political gurus is losing in an election and they can't handle any sort of pressure in their life. And so they feel so offended. And so they go around disturbing society. They have no center. They're insecure. They are weak, as you said. But they're not taking a step back to see how much they are controlled by social media, what YouTube spreads, and how it spreads dissent and division amongst humanity. We didn't have half of the dissent and division in humanity before social media was a thing, right? And it's just because social media is a thing, everyone has access to it, and so that everyone comes to their own conclusions based on their own sensibilities. And then you see people who were close, who aren't friends anymore, and this and that, and you think, you're not friends because of social media, not the ideas that you resonate with, but only because of social media. And people aren't thinking about that, right? And so even on these social media applications, they themselves follow a politically correct narrative as well. You and I can't say certain things on here. Our content will be demonetized. They won't promote my content. Well, they haven't promoted my content because of things that I've said for years on the content. They don't like Eastern philosophy and spirituality. And so is that a free society? Is that a true democratic society, or is that a communist society? Or is that a Marxist society? And so we know the answer there, right?
Yeah.
And so hence why Confucianism adapted well to Marx and the Cultural Revolution with Mao. And Taoism didn't. Taoism and Buddhism were destroyed in China through the Cultural Revolution. But Taoism lived on in the mountains. Taoism lived on through hermits and teachers of that nature, but not how the Taoists probably were 2,500 years ago, when there was a lot of scholars also within the Taoist tradition. But they disappeared through that time. And so in the end, we have to begin to emulate the Tao and become that sovereign individual, not be swayed by this and that, and always have a good BS detector. A lot of people throw away their BS detector because society tells you that this is the way it should be. and then we lose our strength. It's constantly trying to take its power away from you. And how it takes its power away from you is because they get ordinary, decent people to police each other. And so if your friend or your family is trying to police you, then you have to be savvy to what's going on here.
Yes, I wanted to ask everyone that if when you look at the way internet, the online world has evolved so far, and we see the kind of changes and effect on just our daily life of social media and access of internet. Can you imagine if we didn't have social media? I guess for some people would think that social media equals internet. But we know it's not true.
No, it's not true.
When the internet first came to our fingertips, there was no social media. It was just like a chatting, online chat, messenger style was about it, really. Even that came a bit later. Internet was used as a database, like almost like this infinite storage in the ether that you store all your books, basically. Like mobile libraries almost. Like, so it's an information database. That is internet, actually. But we are, again, like the many tech companies from Silicon Valley began with the creating all this social media platform. Again, the Facebook was actually the pioneer of it. And all these companies came from Silicon Valley, and they saw a lot of opportunities and the potential of it, right? Because we are social animals. We like to speak to other people and whatnot. But again, they took more initiative as time went on. They made it as a tool to manipulate people and control how people think, right? They can control the information that goes up to, and again, algorithm come into place, and that controls what you get to see, right? What you choose to see or what you want to see. Again, machine don't really know your mind. It can't read your mind what you want. But anyway, so there's so much information basically shoved on our faces unwillingly, right? So whatever comes up on YouTube, Facebook, whatever platform you're on, that's what you get to see, right? And whatever, it can be sensitive, it can be stimulating information, but they read it and they take on board and they talk about it. They consume a lot of their energy into it, right? They build their own opinion and they fight back. They write their own posts and comment and whatnot, and this and that. So in the end, social media is the very problem and the root of how the humanity lost our own innate ability to think for ourselves. That led to obviously losing our ability to have a critical mind as well, right? Because, I mean, social media always provide the counter argument that you can always lean to, right? That you can always agree with. It said some other network company said this, so that must be true. And then, like it just goes on and on. And again, so we put the brain literally outside and gave it to social media company, basically. That's what's happening. We lost our ability to think.
Don't need this anymore.
Yeah, that's right. Here you go. You do something with it. You can do whatever you want to do with it. And I'll just sit and then I'll just receive the data that you give me, basically.
That's right. Yeah.
That's how it is. So constantly it breeds the weak humanity, you could say.
Yeah, and also to speak to that, it is training people to be locked in the left side of their brain. And I'm talking about this in the Ian McGilchrist style of neuroscience, the proper style of neuroscience, not pop psychology when we think about left and right brain. But social media locks you into this left side of the brain. And the irony is that when you're living just in that side of the brain and you're being trained to be this analytical creature that just sees black and white, that's all you see. All you see is black and white. There is no surprise that all of these people lean into activism and have a disdain for spirituality. And Ian McGruckus actually talks about this in a lot of his lectures and in the book as well, where spirituality comes from the right side of the brain, because a lot of our grander intuitions of the world come from the right side of the brain. But as he addresses what's happening with social media and the internet and so forth and so on, is that it's kind of, we're just shutting that off, even though it'll always be there, but we're just training one side of the brain. And so that's why you get this type of strange lingo on social media and the internet. You know, I get it in the comments section where people have a certain way of talking, and you can tell it's only the left side of their brain. There's not a holistic mentality there. And so they speak from a very activist-oriented perspective, which is only left brain thinking. It's not right brain thinking. Grander understandings of the world come from the right brain. And so our intuitions for God, religion, spirituality, our ability to sense something happening in the world of a larger scale that you can't define, these come from the right side of the brain. The right side of the brain is not just about intuition either, like what pop psychology tries to say. It's about the sense making of the world, you know. So you're sense making the world, but you're also, in some sense, through that side of the brain, there's a connection to something much greater than yourself, where the left side of the brain is all about focus. It's all about focus. So you are caught in the detail always and subject to black and white thinking.
Yes.
And so depending on your conditioning, you're always going to discern between what is good or bad according to how you've been trained. And no one can change your opinion on that. That's why you see these young people who are crazy with protests and this and that. And when someone tries to speak just a little bit of sense to them, they lose it and go crazy because they are stuck in that side of the brain. They don't have an objective perspective of what's happening. And so they've drew their line in the sand and said, you're on that side, I'm on this side. We are enemies and I hate you. And so it's interesting in this day and age where hate has become a virtue. So you see this online, right, where people openly hate each other. They will openly write negative things to people they've never ever met in their life. And so you've turned hate into a virtue. You know, you see all the advertisings now for clothing brands and this and that, and they're all frowning and like no one's smiling. It's strange, right? Like, so we're training the world to be violent, to be hateful, and that's what's thought of as being virtuous. Whereas if you are walking around happy and jovial and kind-hearted, those type of people would say, oh, they have some sort of privilege. That's why they're like that. You know, there's always a justification because that's what the left brain thinks. That's all it can think. Where from the right brain, of course you're happy for someone who is happy and jovial and joyful. You want, it's infectious when you're around them. You're like, man, why are you happy? Like, I want to be happy too, you know what I mean? Like, what's going on? Like, what's happening in your life? Like, tell me. But we're turning away from that because social media is training us to be anti-Taoist, which means we're just going in the left side of the brain, where the Tao originates in the right side of the brain. And Lao Tzu's whole mentality, Zhuangzi's whole mentality particularly, of just taking it easy and living an aimless life, is you're more resonating with this side of the brain because you understand that all of these ideas of morality and ethics and so forth and so on, they're all man-made, and usually man-made by people who want to control you, who seek to control you. As in their time, it was Confucius, right, in the Warring States period of China. And so people then were losing their sense of intuition of the world. And so then you had good, decent people binding their feet, men sleeping a certain way like a stiff log, who couldn't sleep, obviously. And so you train people to follow these politically correct narratives that are actually really politically incorrect, yes, and immoral, but they're shown to be the right way because the right side of the brain is all that we should focus on. And so all we become then is like a calculator. Humanity becomes like a calculator. We just analyze everything and we think that that's the way it is. This chapter is saying it's not the way it is because big things come from small things. And so when you even perceive something in the world and you think that that's the way it is, but then you got to think, well, wait, I'm only seeing an end result. What did it take for that to be what it is? So like a crooked tree, right? What did it take for that crooked tree to be the way it is? Now let's contrast that to a crooked human being. How did that crooked human being become the way they are? And so there's a lot of small steps to become not even a finished product, but the product that you perceive them in that present moment.
Yeah, well, there's a lot to unpack there, like crooked human being, for instance. Society and our immediate environment is one thing. That itself is a very complicated topic of conversation. And plus, when the infant baby is born, there's a household, is the immediate environment for that baby to grow up in that household is another factor, what kind of parents the baby will have, and their personality, their even values, and even small habits, and even way they speak, everything will affect the baby's process of growing up, right? And so it's almost like the scientist, what Gottsaad said about the mind pathogen, right? It's when you look at from a distance, it's like a phenomenon that is happening globally in quite a large scale, but I personally don't believe it's actually that large scale. It's happening within very small number of people around the world. But because they magnify those people's voice all around the world, and therefore that's all we hear from news and social media, so that we think that is the way the world is. But I don't think that is actually how it is. But it's just a very small number of people are carrying that kind of message and try to spread around the world. So yeah, that type of people, of course, not only just the left brain minded people, but also they might suffer from some sort of the pathogen, the brain neural network is kind of misfiring. I think there must be chemical imbalance within their brain, and even hormone imbalance within their biochemistry in these people. Therefore, they can come up with some really absurd ideas like that, and that is not normal. No. And the why they became where they are, we can say many things, usually gullible people. And I believe the woke ideology is a man-made culture for weak people. And that is a man-made culture for weak people to follow. So those weak individuals have a lot to think about what's been happening to themselves and how they were raised, for instance. They need to really look back on themselves very carefully. And again, the right part of our brain is, like you touched on, it's not just like intuitive thinking, creativity, it's like being a sensible and this. It's maybe a bit too overly simplified, right? So it's a lot to do with how you spend your time in nature, on your own sometimes, go for a walk, and you feel and you smell the air, and all these things you stimulate in your right side of brain, which helps left brain as well. But that's why we have two sides of brain, right? Sure, So we need to activate right side of brain from just having actually the rest, again, with the parasympathetic nervous system, right? And you need to activate the parasympathetic nervous system to have the whole human being, really, both brains communicating well.
That's right. Well, social media only trains the left side of the brain.
Yes.
As you were saying, you're walking around nature and this and that. You are connected to something much greater than yourself. Like your sensory experience is a lot different. You go to the temple and smell incense. You see people meditating, paying pranams. This is a right brain natural experience rather than this. And then when something you don't like, dislike.
Thumbs down.
Thumbs down. Yeah, you really got them. Nice one. And so we're training people to live in cotton wool, and that's a big problem. And look, my parents were saying that back in the 80s when I was a kid, right? that people are training their children to be in cotton wool. You're not exposing them to the world. You're not toughening themselves up naturally, right? Like, one of the big problems now is monitored play, which makes children weak. This has been tested because parents are always watching their kids, always watching. Well, you don't want to watch out for the stranger and the thing. And it's like, but that's what they've always been. You know what I mean? You can't live your life in fear. And so if we look back 10 years ago, 20 years ago, 30 years ago, life was harder. As life gets easier and easier and easier, it's ironic that people feel they have more problems because they haven't been exposed to the world enough. They haven't toughened up. And so this is a huge problem going forward because the youth that are alive now will be adults and will be running the world. Are they going to be running the world and getting super offended by, like, say, if the leader of North Korea at that time says something to the leader of America and they are overly sensitive and offended by everything, then they just drop nuclear weapons on them? Because that's the result, right? Yeah. Because a weak person is a dangerous person.
That's right.
Someone who is easily offended is a dangerous person. They have a weak character. And so life was tougher in the past. And so people had stronger characters. People could deal with adversity a lot better. If someone said a word to you, like, for example, sticks and stones may break my bones, but words will never hurt me. That was a common phrase. And we were trained that way. If someone bludgeons you, obviously you've got to defend yourself.
Yes.
But if someone calls you a word, no matter how, like, sensitive the word is, you're just like, well, that's not really who I am, and see you later. Like, it doesn't affect me at all. Mm-hmm. And so Lao Tzu wants us to be exposed to the elements of life. And it's in exposing yourself to the elements of life that creates a strong character within you and gives you the tools to go through life so you can create great things step by step by step. If you're sitting around and being easily offended by this or that and have an opinion about everything and you're trying to reorient the world according to how you think, you are always going to fail in life. You are going to be a complete failure. Like you said, it is only a small minority that's magnified, right? And the problem is the media companies and the social media companies have been infected by that same mind pathogen and have a vested interest in trying to divide the world because they don't like people being happy. They don't like people getting along. That doesn't suit their bottom line. What suits their bottom line is controversy and violence and conflict because that's what pays their bills. And again, no one's thinking about this. No one's thinking about it objectively. Why would the media companies not promote love instead of fear? Because that's not what pays the bills.
That's right.
And so you've got to have objectivity. You've got to see this. And you've got to go through that process of unlearning. And once you go through that process of unlearning, all of these crazy ideas that people have tried to infect your mind with, they begin to drop away.
Yes.
And then your ideals will be based on the way of the Tao and peace and harmony and love and care for each and every person in the world. But you need that humility to make that happen. So guys, we hope you enjoyed and we'll see you guys next time.